What's your name?
Mary Kisor,
Mary Kaiser. And what year were you born?
1928,
1928. And are you from Portsmouth originally?
Soda County. I was born at Friendship
Oh, great. And did you grow up in Friendship?
in Turkey Creek.
Okay. What are some memorable things about your time growing up out there?
Well, it was nice to grow up out in the country and have nice neighbors that you could play in the creeks with, and my mother's sisters lived near us, and her nephew, and it was just a wonderful time to grow up.
Where did you go to school?
Friendship Elementary in West Portsmouth. It was called Washington High School then.
And you mentioned that you were a teacher in Soda County.
No, honey, I was a secretary in the Portsmouth City
fantastic.
schools. Yes.
And what years were you there?
Oh my goodness. I don't even remember what year I went. I retired 15 years ago and I worked almost 30 years.
Okay.
I worked at Northmoreland School for 16 years and they closed it. And then I came to Portsmouth High School and I worked as secretary in the guidance office for, I believe it was 11 years. And then 2 years in the athletic office.
So you worked there through the 70s and through the...
I have to stop my 57, 60. I think I'm sorry.
No, it's fine.
I went to work in the 60s
Okay.
and worked up into the 80s.
Okay. That's a pretty good stretch of time
Yes.
to be working in the schools. And something I always ask people, since you were working there in the 60s, we always study in school about how complicated the decade of the 60s were, and especially with students, particularly college students, but also high schoolers. Did you see any of that?
No, our children were wonderful, and I loved it.
Oh, that's great. So, working over that stretch of time, what do you think has changed the most about the schools?
Well, I think we've got much bigger schools, and of course the computers came in, which is why I quit working, and everything got more complicated, I think, after I retired. And I know the teachers that were teaching when I was working, most of them have retired, and as each of them have retired, they've told me how glad they are to be out of it because the children are not like they used to be.
So, on that particular topic, having grown up here and knowing this area, what would you say is the biggest change that you've seen happen here?
The lack of industry and the things that naturally we lose because we don't have the industry, because people don't have the money to do them. And there used to be a wonderful swimming pool here and things for the kids to do in the summer. And I think, all that is missing.
Well, you working in a school, I'm sure you had some exciting experiences there. What are some of your more unusual ones?
I can't think of anything as being more unusual. I started out as an aide in the system, and so actually the aide's job was to apply the Band-Aids, to ride the ambulance to the hospital when a child broke its arm, to be the mother away from home.
Oh, that sounds like a really interesting job.
And I loved it.
Did you like it?
I loved it, yes. And so the principal, who was my principal at the time the school closed, I had several choices I could take the jobs off. And he said, go to Portsmouth High School. You'll love it. And I said, but I won't have my little kids. And he said, that's okay. They're only bigger kids, and they need love as much as the little ones, and that's what you give them. And I've thanked him repeatedly. Yes.
That must be nice. Do you feel like you've gotten to know some of the kids that came
Many,
through
many, and many are still my friends. Like I get Christmas cards. I have one girl in Cincinnati and one down in Tennessee that every year I get family pictures, and I hear from them, and I love them dearly. And my doctor was one of mine. It is nice.
That's fantastic. It sounds like you've got some you have an influence on the kids going to school.
I really love them.
That's so important. People to know that there's somebody that cares about them.
I really did, and I still do.
Find a good question for you. Well, since you spent so much time in the schools as an adult, and you, how would you compare the schools to when you were working in them to when you were actually in school?
Well, I don't really think there was a lot of difference except the advances and the difference in what was happening in the world. But as for the kids and the people I worked with, I didn't find much change.
And I think you may have already answered this a little bit. What accomplishments are you most proud of in your life?
Well, my family, most of all, of course. I have 4 of my own. And the fact that I could enjoy the kids. In fact, I hated to quit.
Sure.
Well, I could have, on that last question, answered a question better for my husband. Because, as I said, he taught in the school system. He taught he taught 1 year in the county system, and then he taught 35 years in the Portsmouth city system, and then he substituted for 20 years because he loved it so much. And he also sold World Book Encyclopedia. And when our kids were in high school, the older ones, we didn't have a car yet. And World Book offered us a car and $1,000 more than he made teaching if he would come with them. And we talked it over, and I said no, because he'd have to travel. But I said the biggest thing is that if you are a dedicated teacher and you help one child, you've done more than money. And he stayed in the school system. And I think that was probably my best accomplishment, because he was able to help so many.
That really sounds like a wonderful career that you guys got to have in this area. It's such a valuable thing for kids to know that there are people that and that's I feel like that's something that isn't kids have necessarily, knowing that somebody
Right.
cares. So in his teaching, did he ever talk about just how things were changing, or?
Well, they didn't change that much for him, except that people, when we were first married, his take-home pay was $100 a month. Yes. And I didn't know that because I worked for the telephone company before we were married, and I was making $65 every 2 weeks and due to get a $5 raise. And I quit the day before we got married because I thought teachers made enough money. So the biggest change was that when he retired, he was only making $14,000 a year. And that year, that fall, they began paying beginning teachers $17,000. And so it improved that way through the years. But the kids, he felt, were still kids. But the economy got better after we were married. The A plant came, and there was such an influx of people, and they made so much more money that the kids weren't as poor as they were when we were first married. I've seen him take coal from our house to coal kids. I've seen him buy boots for a child that didn't have any. And so in the end, it wasn't like that.
That's wonderful. Is there anything that you want to make sure you say, or anything that you think would be really valuable to people listening?
I really don't think so.
I just don't. I want to make sure we didn't cut you off short.
No, you didn't, dear.
My last question is: you know that we're going to keep all of these interviews. We're going to keep them at the library in our local history part. And if you want to, you can leave. Put a message on for any kids, grandkids, anyone that you think might someday look at it.
Well, my children are all out of town. That's the trouble with a good education, and they grew up, and there was nothing in this town for them to do. And, of course, 2 of them are attorneys, but the town had so many attorneys that it was kind of overrun with them. And so they could make much more money out of town. And, of course, my daughter, the nursing here was only paying like $500 a month when she graduated from nurses training. She could go to Columbus and make $800. And then she eventually went to Michigan, but she's back at Ohio State now. So they all could do better out of town. So they wouldn't be, I doubt they'll ever come to the library. And all my kids that went to school know how much I love them.
Thank you so much for talking to us today. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. I've enjoyed.